So, hello! Welcome to the very first episode of Ngobrol bersama Seribu Tujuan. I'm here at Orygen with Joanna and Zoe.
Hello.
Hi.
So, okay, we're gonna talk. Joanna is the head researcher for suicide prevention, and Zoe, were the youth advisor during the project. So, today, I think we're gonna start with why did you start Chat Safe, and what was the initiative behind all of that?
So we started Chat Safe, I think, because we know that young people use social media all the time to talk about suicide and suicide-related thoughts and feelings. And I think the dominant narrative around the time had been that using social media to talk about suicide was an unsafe or an unhelpful thing to do. And really, young people were constantly being advised not to talk about suicide on social media platforms. And, you know, people were really reflecting on all the potential for harm that social media could do when it came to topics like suicide. And I guess the approach that we'd taken here at Orygen, certainly in our work that we'd done with young people, was to really listen to the fact that in addition to the potential existing for harm, that actually there was a lot of potential benefit that young people gained from having conversations about suicide on social media platforms. And so one of the things we wanted to do was look at ways that we could help them have those conversations safely and in a constructive way, rather than telling them not to have those conversations at all. I mean, I guess what we were thinking was young people are using social media all the time to talk about suicide, and they don't intend to do that harmfully, but the potential for harm exists, and we don't want to just shut those conversations down. So it was really about how can we empower or equip young people to have those sorts of conversations safely.
Was there a reason why youth specifically was targeted? Is that because they were like the main users of social media? Or was there another reason as to why it was specifically towards youth?
So at Orygen, all our work is around young people. So we're a youth mental health service, and all our research and all our clinical work is really targeted at young people aged about 15 to 24. But we also know that young people are probably the most avid users of social media, and that's the ways in which young people communicate, you know, about sensitive topics. And probably Zoe can tell you a bit more about that than I can.
Yeah, I think because also young people have asked for these guidelines. Young people have talked about mental health and suicide online for so long. And I think it's about time that we actually have, I guess, a guidance on how we can actually do it safely. And I know a lot of parents fear and think that, you know, social media can cause harm. But a lot of young people think that social media can be used to also help other people and help young people reach out to one another, or help them find services as well if they need to, that it can actually be part of the solution and not just a problem.
Yeah, so when we started this piece of work a few years ago, there was probably a few things that underpinned it. So one was, I think, the fact that suicide rates in young people are continually going up here in Australia, but also in other parts of the world. And although there was a lot of investment and a lot of money being put into suicide prevention efforts, youth suicide rates were still going up. So it made us think that we needed to be doing things a bit differently. And we needed to listen to young people in terms of what they thought some of those solutions might be, rather than applying adult solutions to young people. So we did do a few pieces of work. So we had a look at the literature, but we also did some survey work. And so, as Zoe said, one of those groups that we surveyed were young people, and we asked them what they thought. And they were telling us that social media actually is a really useful thing for them and a really helpful thing for them in the ways that Zoe described. But they did feel they needed some help to keep themselves safe online.
So, I mean, Australia is a very multicultural society. In coming up with Chat Safe and in the process of researching for that, how did you navigate your way through that? Because obviously when you're coming from different cultural backgrounds, it's different for everybody. Yeah. So how did you navigate your way?
So I guess we did a couple of things, I suppose. I mean, as I say, we kind of started off by kind of reviewing all of the literature, and that was the international literature around what works in youth suicide prevention online, all around the world. But then what we did was this kind of series of co-design workshops to bring the guidelines to life through the campaign content that you would be familiar with. And in doing that, we worked with young people from all walks of life, didn't we? So we had people that represented all sorts of different cultural groups from across Australia. And we specifically targeted some. So we had workshops for people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, and we had a lot of actually Sudanese young people take part in some of those workshops. We did specific workshops for Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander young people and other groups who are kind of often marginalised in society or overrepresented in suicide statistics. So we really went to some effort to try and recruit young people from all walks of life into the work that we did and have their voices heard. But probably the other couple of things to say is that we're now in the process of globalizing the guidelines. So we're working with partner agencies in 10 different countries from around the world to translate the guidelines for different communities and different regions. And we're also about to run a series of activities next year with young people and families from across northwest Melbourne, from different cultural and linguistic backgrounds as well, to try and diversify the guidelines a little bit. So I think the other thing that we did is, because we were terribly proud of these guidelines, they were the first in the world, and there were a lot of work and effort went into developing them. But I think the other thing we knew is that young people wouldn't really engage with a 30-page PDF document that's sitting on a mental health website. So the other thing we did is, and as I mentioned before, we did a lot of co-design workshops with young people around how to bring the guidelines to life through a national social media campaign. So that's the other thing we've done. So we worked with young people to take bite-sized sections of the guidelines and turn them into campaign content. So what we've got is a series of animations. We've got a series of kind of short video clips that were made by young people for other young people, and a series of sort of still images with some text going across the top of them. And that's all being pushed out now through a national campaign, through Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook,
Tumblr, YouTube,
and Twitter. I think. And and that's had great traction, I think, across the country. And we're also testing it in a trial. So we'll develop the research evidence behind it. But that seems to be reaching it's reached well over 1 million, nearly 2 million young people across the country in a way that's engaging for them. So they sort of said to us, well, we want to see video. We want to see ourselves reflected back in the campaign. So we know it talks to all young people and it represents all of us. So I think that's been important to have done, to sort of bring the guidelines to life so they actually feel a bit more engaging for young people, I think.
Okay, so we're going to take ChatSave into real life situations. Let's just say, how do we support someone that is suicidal? Just in general, this is not just on social media, just in general, if there's somebody that confided in you, and how do we support them in doing it safely in real life situations?
Well, if a friend came up to me right now, I would, first ask them, are they feeling suicidal right now? And I would, talk to them to see if they have like a psychologist already, or like call their parents as well to see if they could come and support. Because I think the tricky thing is that, yes, I do want to give support, but sometimes I'm not qualified to do that. And so I think it's really important to know that if you are like in that situation, sometimes the best thing you can do is direct them to services who are qualified and specialized in helping them go through that, because you have to take care of yourself as well. And it's a lot of responsibility for a young person to take on if someone did come up to you and say they are experiencing these symptoms. So the best approach would be to just go and find and like lead them to services, maybe go to the doctor with them as well and give them support that way. But not take it all onto yourself, because you are not ready, like you don't have the skills. You're not a psychologist. So, in terms of safety as well, like you want to get a professional to come in and help out in that way.
Yeah. Okay. So that's like in real life, and that's if somebody confided in you. What if, in terms of like social media, what if you see like a friend that's sort of posting a story on Instagram or something and saying sort of concerning things, like along the lines of, I don't know, I hate my life, I don't want to be here anymore, or stuff like that. If you see something like that, how do you go about approaching it? Sort of, because that would be you that's approaching it and not them confiding in you.
Well, there's a few options. Like in the guidelines, we talked about how one, you could let the social media platform know. So for example, Instagram and Facebook have safety committees. So you can actually click report and then click I'm worried about this person, and then Facebook will actually reach out to that person so you don't have to. The second thing you can do also is to direct message them and say, hey, how are you? Like, I saw something and I just want to check in and see how you're going. But a third thing that I think a lot of people don't think about as well is you don't have to respond, because again, you don't have the skills and you might not even have the capacity to respond. So it is okay to just not respond, or if you want to, you can contact their family or like another close friend. But yeah, there are different options, and it just depends on what you feel comfortable and I guess ready to do.
Yeah, I might just jump in there as well and say, I mean, that's absolutely right. But I think the other message that we do like to give to young people is if you are worried about a friend and you feel able to respond, or you want to reach out, and we know that lots of young people do want to reach out and help their friends, and they do often get exposed to that type of content online and don't quite know what to do with it. It is fine to just ask the question and to say, I've seen you've posted X, Y, or Z, and I'm a bit worried about you. Are you feeling okay? And sometimes when people have thoughts like this or feel like this, they have thoughts of ending their lives. Is that something that's going on for you? And it's completely fine to ask those questions. It's also completely fine, as Zoe said, not to if you don't feel equipped to, and to get somebody else to jump in and help. But the other thing it's okay to do is not to feel like you have to have all the answers. So, you know, sometimes a young person will just want you to walk alongside them or to listen and not be judgmental, and, you know, and just provide some sort of peer support, if you like. And that will often be enough to get somebody through a bit of a crisis type situation. But again, as Zoe said, sometimes it's really a good idea to reach out or direct message them rather than necessarily post on the public wall.
I like that. I really like that last bit that you said. It also depends. To me, translated into like sort of depend on whether mentally you're able to take on that as well, because it can be a lot when you see a friend that's struggling to that capacity.
And we know that young people, they tell us all the time that they want to help their friends, but they don't always feel that they can or they know how to. And so we do give some tools and tips if they do want to reach out and do feel able to. Here's some language you can use, here are some words you can use. But often it is okay to check in with yourself and make sure you're feeling in a place where you can respond. And again, if people don't feel able to respond, there's all sorts of self-care stuff in the guidelines, I think, isn't there? And some information about how you can link them in with other services or supports.
So speaking of social media, as of late, there's been I don't want to say trend because it's like I don't want this to be a trend, but especially in the K-pop community, like in South Korea, there's been, I think within the past month, there's been like a couple of deaths. So that gets reported heavily, and it's on social media. Sometimes it's everywhere all at once. So I guess the question to that would be, should we or should we not report stuff like that? Like, is that something that should be reported as heavily? Because it can, we don't know, it could be triggering for some people.
I think it's tricky because that sort of information and that sort of stuff does get reported very heavily. But we do know from the research literature that a lot of very sensationalized posts, particularly around celebrity suicide, a lot of repeated media reporting of suicides like that can have quite a negative impact on the community. So it can be triggering, it can be distressing for people to have that level of exposure to information about suicide. But we do know it can also lead to a spike in suicides, particularly amongst people who might be already vulnerable to suicide or might particularly relate to that particular celebrity who's taken their own life. So I think it's unrealistic to expect the community not to talk about these things. But there are guidelines in lots and lots of countries now around how we should report those sorts of deaths in the media, including in social media. And that really comes about not having big sensationalist headlines, not having suicide on the front page of everything, not having very specific images or graphic images and details of the method of suicide that the person used, but also not having that repeated exposure to it. And again, in our guidelines, we have some content in there around, if you feel you're being overexposed to this sort of content, it's fine to kind of snooze this sort of content from time to time, or perhaps don't reshare or repost content that you know to be unsafe. So for example, if content has got lots of graphic images or graphic details in it, perhaps don't repost or share that type of content.
Okay, so that would answer the next question, because the next question would be, how do we safely turn that into conversation, talk about suicide in social media, just in general? Because it is a topic that comes out a lot, especially in young people, and sometimes it can be a little taboo for them to talk about. I feel like especially in countries like mine, Indonesia, we kind of just don't talk about it. We're kind of just like push it to the side and not talk about it because people are scared. People don't know how to talk about it. So I guess, like I said, how do we safely talk about it just as a topic in general on social media? Because that's the platform that we use, young people use nowadays. Yeah.
I think it's really tricky because I'm Malaysian as well. And so in Malaysia, no one talks about mental health. Like, it's just like, you don't go there. So I guess, and the stigma as well is just really, makes it really hard for you to actually open up that conversation. So if you do want to have that, I think, and again, there's tips as well in the guidelines, but you can start with like a little content warning as well, like just to let people know what your post is about. And then to also, offer messages of hope and like, or stories of how, other people have recovered, so that you are, I guess, setting an example to other people who might be struggling to, remind them that, hey, I know you're hurting, but you will get there and you will recover and you will get better. This is just, a period of time. And so, yeah, I guess starting with a little content warning, like, hey, just wanting to chat about this, and then you can keep it, I guess, positive, but also, I wouldn't want to bombard people as well with too much like facts and stuff like that. I would just talk about, I don't know, maybe like if you want to share your own experiences, try not to overshare, like just keep it nice and simple, and also think about how other people would want to react, and think about what other people would want to hear as well. And because everything you post online is permanent, so there's that thing as well to think about.
So probably just to sum it up, make it a bit more personal, but in a positive light.
If you're like ready to do that, yeah,
because there's been a lot, especially as of late, whenever we talk about suicide, I feel like it's the people that have done it. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like, well, for the people that haven't and we're trying to prevent it, it's better to highlight on the whole. Yeah.
So I think there's definitely some evidence that's emerging, and this is kind of a really new field of research, really. So, although young people are using social media all the time and we're having lots of conversations, the research takes a while to catch up. But what we are seeing is some research evidence that's emerging to say that, as Zoe said, stories of hope, for example, or recovery tend to be quite positive and have protective effects for people. So the idea when somebody's sharing a story where they perhaps have felt suicidal but haven't ended up engaging in a suicidal act, actually it can be quite positive and quite protective for people, because then people see, there is hope, I can get over this, that, that particular person got better. So that kind of conveys that idea of hope. And also messages that include information about how they overcame those difficulties. So they get the sense that those difficulties aren't necessarily permanent. There's a different path, if you like. So messages of how I sought help or how I gained mastery over that sort of situation actually tend to have quite a positive effect on other people. And we also, we also always say stay away from kind of, graphic details of locations of suicides or suicide attempts. Stay away from graphic details of methods. Stay away from really glorifying or sensationalizing the topic, because that can tend to have a negative impact.
And I do find these days, like, there's a lot of like anonymous groups online, like on Facebook. There's like confessions pages where like young people and students would actually go up and post an anonymous post talking about how 2019 was such a hard year, but I made it through, and I went to therapy, I made friends, I got a new job. If I can do it, you can do it too. And it was anonymous, so that way the person's protecting their identity as well, but they're also promoting and talking about recovery and mental health and how other students can also do the same. But yeah, I think a lot of people are starting to do that now as well on Facebook, just posting a lot of anonymous but positive messages of recovery and hope. And I think that's also one way we can, I guess, slowly break down the stigma as well. Okay. Yeah.
So thank you very much for your time. It's been a very interesting conversation. If you want to check out the PDF for ChatSafe, you can go to orygen.org.au/ChatSafe. The link for that will also be on the description of this video. So you can just click on that and it's right there for you to see. Thank you for your time. Thank you for watching.